A boy sat at the back of the classroom daydreaming, not because he didn't care, not because he wasn't smart, but because the way he learned wasn't welcomed in that room. He thought in pictures. He learned through movement. He needed time, not tests. But none of that was written into the lesson plan. So they called him lazy. They called him slow. They told his parents to lower their expectations. That boy was one of millions, and he deserved better. Every child does. Let's talk about what it really means to see a child. Not in the way school systems check names off a roll call or skim over grades in a spreadsheet. I'm talking about really seeing them, the human being behind the behavior, behind the silence, behind the so-called underperformance. Because too many kids walk into classrooms and feel invisible from the start. Not because they're not trying, but because who there doesn't fit the narrow definition of what education has been told to look for. We've created a system that's great at identifying deficits, but not so great at recognizing humanity. We've got protocols for when a child can't read at grade level, but we rarely stop to ask why that level was set in the first place or whether it applies to that child's lived experience. We can list their weaknesses in a meeting, write them into plans, diagnose them, modify them, but we forget that none of that matters if the child doesn't feel seen. A diagnosis might explain how someone learns, but it will never explain who they are, and that difference matters. Seeing a child means understanding that behavior is communication, that acting out might actually be a cry for connection. That zoning out might be the result of anxiety or sensory overload or years of hearing that you're not good enough. It means realizing that that kid who never speaks might be the one who's been told too many times that their voice doesn't matter. When we don't take the time to see what's underneath, we risk misjudging, mislabeling, and worst of all, missing a child entirely. It's easy to teach a curriculum. It's harder to build a relationship, but one will last longer than the other. When a child feels seen, they begin to believe they belong. And that sense of belonging, it's rocket fuel. It unlocks risk-taking. It makes space for growth. It says, you are more than a number. You are more than what you struggle with. You matter here. We can't overstate how powerful that is, especially for the kids who've been told again and again that they're not enough. Every child deserves to walk into a room and find an adult who looks at them and doesn't see a problem to fix, but a person to nurture. That takes empathy. That takes curiosity. That takes the courage to challenge our own assumptions. But when we do, something shifts. Education stops being about controlling kids and starts being about connecting with them. If we want children to engage, to learn, to grow, we have to begin by seeing them fully. Not the version that's convenient, not the version that fits into a spreadsheet, but the version that shows up every day with a heart full of questions, strengths we haven't noticed yet, and a need to be seen just as they are. That's the foundation. And until we get that right, none of the rest will truly matter. We live in a world that talks a lot about celebrating diversity, but when it comes to how children learn, we still expect them to act, think, and perform in the same narrow ways, sit still, focus quietly, read fast, write neatly, stay on schedule. And if a child can't do those things, we label them, we penalize them, we try to fix them instead of fixing the system that's failing to recognize that difference is not a defect. Every child has the right to be different without being punished for it. But difference is often met with discipline. The child who can't sit still is told they're disruptive. The one who talks too much is told they're disrespectful. The kid who learns by doing, who needs to move or fidget or ask questions out loud, they're written off as difficult. We don't stop to ask, what if that movement is how they process? What if that curiosity is how they connect? What if what we call misbehavior is just a different kind of brilliance that we don't yet understand? The tragedy is that instead of seeing these differences as gifts, we treat them as obstacles. We medicate what we don't accommodate. We silence what we don't know how to support. We try to mold kids into a system that wasn't built for them, instead of building a system that responds to who they actually are. And in doing so, we strip them of their sense of worth. We tell them, sometimes without saying a word, that the way they naturally show up in the world is wrong, but what if we flip the script? What if instead of asking children to be less different, we ask schools to be more flexible? What if we built learning environments where movement wasn't just tolerated but encouraged? where speaking out loud wasn't a problem, but a pathway, where there wasn't just one right way to show understanding, but many. That's not about lowering standards. It's about broadening access. It's about making space for real human beings with real differences. And difference isn't rare. It's everywhere. It's in every classroom, every family, every community. The only thing rare is a system that embraces it instead of erasing it. Kids don't come with standard settings. They come with stories, with culture, with learning styles, with neurodiversity. And if we design our schools around the idea that there's one way to succeed, we guarantee that many children will fail. Not because they can't learn, but because we didn't let them learn in a way that works for them. Letting kids be different is not just about kindness. It's about justice. It's about equity. It's about creating an educational experience where kids don't have to trade their authenticity for acceptance. Because no child should ever be made to feel ashamed of who they are just to fit in. Every child deserves an education that doesn't punish their difference, but honors it. That's not just good practice. That's their right. School should be a place of growth, not a place of fear. But for far too many children, the classroom feels less like a space to explore and more like a place where they're constantly walking on a tightrope. Fear of saying the wrong answer, fear of being judged, fear of being sent to the hallway or called out in front of their peers, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. And when fear is the loudest voice in the room, learning can't happen. Because you can't grow when you're just trying to survive. Think about it. How can a child feel safe enough to take academic risks when every mistake is met with embarrassment or punishment? How can a child ask for help if they believe it will be seen as weakness or laziness? How can a child who's already struggling emotionally find the courage to raise their hand when they're worried they'll be misunderstood, ignored, or worse, mocked? These aren't questions of ability. These are questions of safety. And emotional safety is the foundation of real learning. Too often, we confuse compliance with success. We think that quiet classrooms mean students are engaged, that following rules equals understanding. But silence can be a sign of fear, not focus. Obedience can come from anxiety, not connection. Some kids get really good at playing the game of school, not because they're learning deeply, but because they've learned how to avoid getting in trouble. That's not education, that's self-protection. Every child deserves a classroom where they are safe to make mistakes, where they are free to question, where failure is treated not as a verdict, but as part of the process. That kind of space doesn't come from rigid discipline or one-size-fits-all policies. It comes from relationships, from educators who know their students as people, not just as test scores, from environments that prioritize trust, empathy, and consistency, from a culture that replaces "what's wrong with you?" with "what do you need?" And let's be honest, some kids come to school already carrying fear. Fear from trauma, from racism, from poverty, from systems that have already told them they're not good enough. For these children especially, school has the potential to either be a healing place or another source of pain. We cannot ignore that responsibility. We cannot expect students to show up ready to learn without first creating a space where they feel emotionally and psychologically safe. Creating this kind of learning environment isn't about lowering expectations. It's about raising our humanity. It's about understanding that safety is not a luxury. It's a necessity, not a soft skill, but a foundational one. Because when a child feels safe, they stop bracing for harm and start reaching for possibility. And in that space, where fear steps back and connection steps forward, real, deep, lasting learning begins. Every child deserves that. Not some, not most. Every child. Access should never be something a child has to earn. And yet, in too many schools, the tools that help kids succeed are treated like privileges, only handed out when a child is diagnosed, struggling enough, or has proven they deserve the extra support. But that thinking is backwards. A child shouldn't have to fail before we give them what they need to thrive. Every student should walk into a classroom where access is built in, not bolted on, where support is the starting point, not the safety net. Let's be clear, giving students options isn't about making things easier, it's about making things possible. When a child needs a calculator or audiobooks or speech to text software or a quiet space to work, we're not giving them an unfair advantage. We're giving them a fighting chance. The same way ramps make a building accessible for someone using a wheelchair, Flexible tools and teaching strategies make learning accessible for all kinds of brains and bodies. These aren't special accommodations. They are essential. They are a matter of equity. Because every child's brain is wired differently. Some process visually, some through touch. Some need repetition. Others need movement. There is no standard issue learner. So why are we still building classrooms around standard issue tools? Why are we waiting until a child is drowning in frustration before we offer a life jacket? Access should be proactive, not reactive. Universal, not selective. Too often, a student has to be labeled before they're supported. But that system is broken. Not because labels are bad, but because they're being used as a gatekeeper. A kid shouldn't need a formal diagnosis to get a second chance on an assignment or to type their notes instead of writing them by hand. A student shouldn't have to sit through meetings and paperwork just to use a tool that helps them understand the content better. That creates stigma. That creates barriers. That tells students you can have help, but only if something is wrong with you. And that message does damage. Instead, we need to shift our mindset from accommodation to design, from fixing kids to fixing systems. Let's design classrooms where tools are offered to everyone from day one, not just those who qualify. Let's give every child the opportunity to figure out what works best for them without shame. Let's normalize options, normalize flexibility, normalize difference. Because the truth is, what helps one student often helps many more. When we build with inclusion in mind, everyone benefits. This isn't about lowering the bar. It's about leveling the playing field. And when we do that, we stop treating support like a favor and start treating it like a right. Because access is not something kids should have to earn through struggle. It's something they should walk into the room already owning. Not after they break down. Not after they fall behind. Before, every child deserves that kind of access because every child deserves a real shot at success. Potential is not a test score. It's not a letter grade. It's not found in a benchmark or a percentile rank. Potential is possibility. It's what lives inside a child before the world tries to define them. And every child has the right to see possibility in themselves, not limits. But for many students, especially those who don't fit the mold of the ideal learner, school becomes a place that narrows their identity instead of expanding it. From an early age, kids start getting sorted. The gifted ones are praised and pushed. The ones who struggle, too often they're boxed in, labeled, managed, remediated. Somewhere along the way, we start defining children by what they can't do instead of seeing everything they could become. And the moment that happens, we limit their future, not because of who they are, but because of what we've decided they're not. But the truth is, brilliance doesn't always show up in predictable ways. Sometimes it's hiding behind hyperactivity. Sometimes it looks like defiance. Sometimes it's masked by anxiety or expressed through art instead of essays. We miss it because we're not looking for it. We're looking for appropriate behavior. We're looking for fast readers, neat handwriting, and calm bodies. But potential doesn't always look neat. Sometimes it's messy, loud, unfinished, and absolutely worth noticing. When we only recognize certain kinds of intelligence, verbal fluency, test-taking ability, academic compliance, we send a dangerous message to the rest of the kids that their value is conditional, that unless they can fit the traditional definition of smart, their strengths don't count. That unless they meet certain standards, their gifts are invisible. But that's not just wrong, that's damaging, because kids believe the stories we tell about them. And when all they hear is what they're not good at, they start to believe that's all there is to them. What if we told a different story? What if we told the child who talks too much, you're a communicator, the one who can't sit still, you're full of energy and ideas, the one who always finds another way to solve a problem, you're a creative thinker. These aren't just feel-good phrases. They are reframes that can change the way a child sees themselves. And that shift in identity from I'm not good at school to I learn differently can be life-changing. Because when children see possibility, they begin to dream again. They start setting goals, not limits. They try, they risk, they grow. And they start to understand that their future is not defined by their past performance, but by their capacity to evolve. That's the power of possibility. It unlocks hope, it builds resilience, and it starts with the adults in their lives refusing to reduce a child to what's wrong and daring to see everything that's right. Every child deserves to walk into school and see mirrors, not cages. Reflections of what they can become, not walls that show them what they'll never be. That's what it means to honor potential. That's what it means to believe in every child. Too often children grow up being told who they are. By adults, by systems, by test results, by labels. They're given roles to play the quiet one, the troublemaker, the underachiever, the star student. And over time, those roles become cages. Invisible boundaries they're not allowed to cross. But every child has the right to be the author of their own story. Not just a character in someone else's narrative, not just a number in a data set. They deserve the pen. They deserve the power. Let's think about what it means to give a child authorship. It means we don't define them by a diagnosis. We don't reduce them to an IEP, a behavior report, or a GPA. Those things might describe one piece of their experience, but they do not capture the whole person. Being the author of your own story means your identity is not limited to how you performed on a test last year or whether you sat still through second period. It means you get to say, this is who I am, this is how I learn, and this is the path I want to walk. For that to happen, education must become more than a delivery system of content. It must be a space where kids can discover themselves. That requires us to listen, really listen. It requires us to ask more questions and make fewer assumptions. When a child says, I'm not good at math, do we dig deeper? Or do we accept that as truth? When a student says, I hate school, do we ask why? Or do we just try to manage their behavior? Children need adults who are curious about their stories, not just in charge of telling them. And part of writing your own story means having choices, having voice. Having the chance to say, this is how I want to show what I know. It means creating space in classrooms for multiple kinds of success. Maybe one child expresses their understanding through a spoken word piece, another through a drawing, another through a well-crafted essay. The point isn't how they express it, it's that they can. That they're allowed to shape their own learning experience, not just survive someone else's structure. When we deny children that kind of ownership, we risk more than just disengagement, we risk self-erasure. A child who never sees their identity, culture, or way of thinking reflected in the classroom begins to believe their story doesn't matter. And when you don't believe your story matters, you stop telling it. You stop writing, you stop dreaming. But when we return the pen to the child, when we say, you get to decide who you are becoming, everything shifts. School becomes not just a place of preparation, but a place of self-construction, of becoming. And that's the goal, isn't it? Not just to create compliant students, but to empower human beings. Not to script their lives, but to give them the skills, the courage, and the freedom to write something beautiful and real and theirs. Every child deserves that right, to write their own story, and to believe it's worth telling. So here's what it comes down to. Every child deserves an education that sees them, values them, supports them, and believes in them. Not someday, not after they struggle, not if they meet certain criteria, but now. An education that doesn't punish difference, but celebrates it. That doesn't demand silence, but invites voice. That offers access as a birthright, not a reward. That creates safety, fosters potential, and hands each child the pen to write their own future. Because education should never be about forcing kids to fit into a system. It should be about building a system that fits them. And if we're not doing that, we're not just failing a few, we're failing all. But we can do better. We must do better. Because every child has the right to this kind of education. No exceptions, no conditions. Every child, every time.